Hi, this is Laird. And welcome to a conversation between Atlanta music critic creator William Ford and composer and educator Daniel Perttu. Thanks for joining us today. Daniel Perttu completed his doctorate at The Ohio State University, master's degree at Kent State University, and bachelor's degree at Williams College, graduating magna cum laude in Phi Beta Kappa. Currently, Perttu is professor of music theory and composition at Westminster College, New Wilmington, Pennsylvania, where he was chair of the School of Music from July 2014 through June 2022. Although getting performances of new music is challenging for living composers, his music has been performed worldwide. According to Perttu, music has always been a kind of magic for me, a portal to other realms. When I was young, I was inspired by fantasy novels such as The Lord of the Rings, and I'm still drawn to myths and legends. I've written works on themes ranging from the planets, the sorcery of Merlin, and the Callanish Stone Circle, to the Torngat Mountains. My aim is to write music that invites audiences into other worlds, so they can rediscover their own sense of wonder. Please welcome AMC creator William Ford and composer Daniel Perttu in conversation.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
And thanks for making your time available.
Yeah, no problem.
I know you do a lot of interviews yourself, and I generally don't like to have me in the picture much because it's really not about me. And you end up, because you want somebody else to be talking, you end up nodding your head a lot, and that looks kind of foolish. But anyway, that's me thinking out loud. Again, It is really good to meet you and to get a chance to talk with you. Do you have any questions of me before we begin?
It's curious. Where are you based again? I'd forgotten.
I'm in Atlanta, actually south of Atlanta.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, you have been a clinical psychologist, right, by profession, but also love music and the arts, etc.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I work in the movies, actually, for most of my time now. Yeah.
Oh, okay. What do you do in the movies?
I'm an actor.
Oh,
mostly background, but nevertheless, still acting.
Yeah. How did I miss that?
Yeah. Well, I generally don't put it on my website very much. But yeah, I've been in probably 225 different productions. Of course, being a psychologist, I'm kind of interested in finding out about how you got to be. And
yeah, of course.
So we like to begin out with questions like, where were you born?
So I grew up around Cleveland, Ohio, in a suburb.
Your parents, were they musically inclined themselves?
Great question. Yeah, my mom studied piano from when she was a kid through high school. So, and she also sang. She sang in choirs, sang just amateurly, still sings. She also loves Celtic music. There are different kinds of music on in the house, classical and Celtic and folk. There wasn't much rock going on because my mom didn't like it. I never took to it much. And, all the other kids, I felt sort of like Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. I mean, they all thought I was sort of weird. And I just sort of didn't care. I ended up finding my tribe, particularly in the music ensembles, particularly more in later middle school, high school, and especially when I was in youth orchestra. I was like, oh my God, these are my people. What was wonderful about that area was so many cultural opportunities. So after going through the schools and I started piano when I was 5 and took lessons, of course, and then played trumpet and bassoon, although I focused more on bassoon. After getting into all that in high school, I was in the Cleveland Orchestra Youth Orchestra, which was like an incredible experience being able to be on the stage in the hall where the Cleveland Orchestra performed. We rehearsed there a lot, and having had that extensive experience with orchestral music, which I had always loved, but having had that experience really fueled my passion for it even further. So yeah, that's where it all started.
What's your first recollection of being interested in playing music?
Oh, that's a great question. My parents played orchestral music when I was really young. I always listened to it. And I started the piano in part because I think my parents valued it, and I was curious about the instrument. My very, very earliest recollection was when my great-grandfather, who died when I was 3, he took me to the piano, and I plunked some notes out, and I remember him taking me there. That's one of my only memories of him. I particularly remember music by Grieg, The Hall of the Mountain King, the Peer Gynt Suite. I remember that in particular. I loved that. I loved the fantasy involved in it. I loved the way the music was very programmatic, and it depicted the mythology and everything so very well.
How old
How
were
old?
you when you listened to it?
All elementary school. And then also Mozart, the Flute and Harp Concerto. That was a favorite of my mom's, and apparently of my grandfather, whom I never met. Then I got into some of the more romantic era. I started really getting curious about it. I was one of those people who just liked to do my own research, even as a kid. So I really liked, I liked certain composers. So then I needed to know everything by them. And it was a process. I'd go to libraries, I'd get scores out, I'd get CDs, tapes first. I mean, oh my God. And then CDs, and then all these old-fashioned things, and just got to know tons of repertoire, and then felt really fortunate to be able to perform it, some of it anyway.
Was it a methodical exploration of composer by composer, or was it a tad helter-skelter?
That's a great question. Okay, I'll fess up. It was pretty methodical, actually. So I got to know the Mozart 21st Piano Concerto, and the C major one, because my mom loved that one, and she loved the second movement of it because it was featured in the movie Elvira Madigan. And then I thought, okay, this is amazing. So now I need to get to know all of the other late Mozart piano concertos. I was around 7 or 8 or whatever, and I read a biography about Mozart, and according to the biography, the later piano concertos were supposed to be better than the earlier ones to my elementary school conception of this. So I thought, okay, well, that's more worthwhile. I'll spend my time getting to know the later ones. So I went from 19 through 27. It was extremely methodical, since you asked. I liked minor better than major, so I focused on 20 and 24 first. But then the 23rd one had the F sharp minor second movement. And I thought, oh my God, I have to check that out. I mean, who writes an F sharp minor? I hate that key. But I have to get to know this. So, and I fell in love with that one. So, and then after that, I thought, well, geez, I better get to know the other ones too, because why do they think that only 19 through 27 are good? And so then I got to know all the rest, including the strange numbers 1 through 4 that nobody really knows much about. So yeah, it was a methodical process. But after my Mozart thing, starting with the piano concertos and the sonatas, because I played a lot of the sonatas as a pianist, I got into the symphonies, but I loved Beethoven around that time. I got to know his piano concertos. I love piano concertos in general. I just thought they were the greatest. So then I went by piano concerto. So I needed to get to know Schumann and Dvorak, and I discovered Dvorak. I thought, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. And then Dvorak wrote a piano concerto. And I thought, wow, why does no one ever play this? So I got to know that. And I love that, even though critics say, well, it's too thickly scored, the orchestration's too dense, whatever. And I thought, well, I still like it. So, and then I got to know the Brahms around there. I switched genres. I focused on symphonies. And it was a great opportunity for me to get to know not only the great romantic symphonies, and also the classical, the Mozart, etc., and the Beethoven. Then was introduced in high school to Mahler by my high school band director. He had played timpani in Mahler too. And he said, well, you love Brahms, you love late romantic, you love Rachmaninoff. He already knew I was playing Rachmaninoff on the piano by then. I was playing the G minor prelude. He said, you've got to get to know Mahler. I played this when I was in college. And so he was one of the timpanists, and I got to know Mahler too. And some of it at first I thought was just so extraordinarily dense and a lot to take in, which was a little weird for me because I really loved the challenge of getting to know new stuff. But then I listened to it more and more, and it became, of course, quickly one of my most favorite pieces of all time in high school. Then I thought, okay, I've got to get to know all the other Mahler symphonies. We played both Mahler 1 and Mahler 4 when I was in youth orchestra. So that fueled my fire, of course, for Mahler symphonies. My parents were a little concerned about why was I listening to all this really dark and stormy music, but they figured, well, it was probably typical of a teenager. Studied the scores. I was fortunate enough in college to have access to facsimiles of the scores. And so I got to look at autographed manuscripts of the Mahler symphonies because I just loved to see the composer's handwriting and the marginalia and to understand the psychology of the composers. In college, that was a time for when I was exposed to music of the 20th century. Although I had been somewhat exposed to Schoenberg and I have to tell you, I hated it. The 12 tone, not Verklärte Nacht, and that was wonderful. But I didn't like 12 tone music at all. I go to Cleveland Orchestra concerts all the time when I was middle school and well, throughout my childhood. And some of the music they were programming in the 80s and 90s, forgive me if it's polemical to say this, but I didn't understand why they were programming it. It sounded just like noise to me. It just didn't fit my concept of how music should sound. It was so dissonant. There was no tension and release that I could discern. And, you know, as compared to a lot of audience members, I actually had a fair amount of training.
Any particular composers other than Schoenberg that come to mind? Struck you that way? I find personally most of the stuff written in the 50s strikes me that way. I think, what were these people thinking?
Yeah, I can say that about the 50s. There were some other people I probably shouldn't say because I'll get myself in trouble, but
probably. But it was worth asking. Who was the conductor of the youth orchestra when you were there?
Gareth Morrell and Hia Ling. We even there was this one time where this guy, he was young, came in, and his name was Alan Gilbert. It was really incredible working with so many different conductors of that quality. And honestly, looking back on it now as a guy in my 40s, I think that was really, it was great that they had such a positive attitude about working with youth orchestra musicians.
You went to college where?
Williams College in Massachusetts.
Oh.
So I didn't go to conservatory. Thought about it. I was very, very serious about piano in high school. I was still better on piano than I was at bassoon, although it was sort of getting neck and neck. But I had a lot of other interests, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I wanted to focus on music. I didn't want to be a high school band director. That was part of the problem. If I wanted to be a high school band director, the path would have been clear. But since I didn't want to do that, it just wasn't me. I was into orchestra, but fool that I was, I didn't play a string instrument. I should have known in 4th grade to do that. All I knew was I was always academically, like, ruthlessly competitive. So I wanted to get into the best college I could get into. And then I figured, well, if I get into the best school I could get into, then, you know, something good will happen. That was the rationale. I had narrowed it down to, generally speaking, to the humanities. So I thought, well, I could see myself going into being maybe a lawyer. I ended up looking at a bunch of Ivy League schools, and then I settled on Williams because it's one of the little Ivies, so to speak. I wanted a small college. Coming from a smaller place, I didn't really want to be on a campus of 20,000 other students at that time in my life. What I discovered there was, on the one hand, it wasn't a conservatory, but on the other hand, there was the Berkshire Symphony there. And that is a combination of professional musicians with student musicians, and you had to audition to get into it. But I did get in on bassoon. I got to play next to my teacher. He was principal bassoonist of Stephen Walt, principal bassoon in Albany Symphony. His father was Sherman Walt, who was the principal bassoon of the Boston Symphony for many years. I ended up falling into this incredible teacher, bassoon teacher, with this incredible pedigree without even intending it. I ended up with fabulous piano instruction there. I kept my piano going. I kept my bassoon going. While I took other classes, liberal artsy things, I thought, oh my God, I can't not do music. But what was wonderful at Williams was I could double major. But I got a ton of performing experience, including with basically a half professional orchestra that played at a professional level. And then there was a student orchestra. I ended up assisting the conductor. I'd always had an interest in conducting. And then I got to be the director of that orchestra for a couple of years. Myself, I got to program, I got to learn conducting. It ended up being a really good experience. I did some composition on my own there, but there was a lot of the new music at the time focused on the avant-garde. I'd learned all of the different movements in the avant-garde, and I thought, I still don't know how I can fit into this. Finally, when I got into graduate school, I started with the idea of doing conducting, but had discovered at that point, once I took counterpoint, that I really needed to switch to composition because that's what I truly love. I continued my studies in composition. I was at Kent State University and finished my master's there, and then I went to Ohio State and did my doctorate in composition. More diverse styles were being accepted, and so I did some more experimental stuff with my own writing, but I thought, I've got to do this. I've got to figure out how to do this and how to say something new. And I found a way of saying something, writing a new narrative in a way that is authentic to me. And so that's what I focused on during those formative years. And then as I've been a composer, I got my first academic job at the University of Louisiana Lafayette from 2007 to 2008, my current professorship from 2008 until now. During all of these years, I also noticed a much more broader openness to all sorts of different styles. And I've been focusing now on writing music that uses tonal and romantic gestures and impulses, but I try to use them in ways that hadn't been, I think, exploited enough. And I'm trying then to develop new narratives, underexploited approaches.
Do you currently have students in composition yourself?
I do, yeah. I've taught compositions and all of my university and college professorships. It's really been wonderful. I mean, one of the things I like to emphasize with them is to figure out their own unique voice and develop their music within its own logic, whatever that might be. So even though I'm not a disciple of the Second Viennese School, if I had a student who wanted to write in that style, for example, I would work with them to make it the best it could be within that style. Because I have students from all sorts of different styles, and I know I've been very opinionated about my own style and what I think of other styles, but that doesn't stop me from helping people from diverse backgrounds with diverse styles. Now, granted, I don't have a lot of students who like to write 12-tone music, but
it seems like making a judgment of what's good in 12-tone music is difficult.
I think principles of good composition can transcend the language that it uses. With a 12-tone composition, one can still create areas of tension and release using other means than pitch. And even possibly using pitch if you do it in a certain way. I mean, Alban Berg's 12-tone music was more tonal sounding. So it is actually possible, for example, to create rhythmic tension and release, or tension and release across the form. I'm using tension and release, but I if it's a piece about stasis, okay, fine, then create a piece that is unapologetically static. I think what's important for a new piece of music is that it is unabashedly clear about whatever it is intending to do. So whether that means, it's a piece like Mahler that's just in your face and romantic and emotional, or if it is a very subtle, very static piece. I have helped students write music that ranges throughout that continuum. So I don't think the pitch material actually matters for that, even if I might not personally like it.
I noticed that one of the first pieces that you liked in classical music was in the Hall of Mountain King.
Yeah.
And much of your music seems to be inspired by myth and legend and Nordic kind of stuff or Celtic kind of stuff. Is there a connection, or is that drawing too much?
For sure there is. The Grieg probably appealed to me in part because my mom read a lot of fairy tales, Germanic or Celtic or Nordic fairy tales to me. I'm half Finnish anyway. My dad's from Finland. And so partly it appealed for that reason. And then because I liked the music so much, that just sort of continued to inspire me. So I think it is just a chicken and an egg phenomenon. You can't say which came first exactly.
When you set out to write something and you're faced with the blank page, how do you decide to begin?
I love that. I love to take my inspiration from something extra musical, usually. Whether it's an incredible scene in nature, whether it's a story, a myth, or a legend, a theme, or a poem, or literature, some piece of work of literature. I love to have that in mind. Then I improvise and I doodle. Sometimes I work at the piano and sometimes I just sing. Those kinds of things frequently drive something melodic. Then I work the harmony from there. I think very carefully then about how it's developed. I think about the form. Some of the forms I use are older forms, but then I manipulate them, change them in ways that might be completely different. Having extra musical inspiration, though, I think is ultimately best for me.
I noticed that you have a piano concerto, and that was premiered in Omaha?
It's called Elven Dream. So the idea is based on what I would imagine the dreams of elves to be. So it's a very epic kind of piece, very fantastical. That one was premiered by Orchestra Omaha. It was also performed by the Lakeland Civic Orchestra, always looking for more performances. And then I have another piano concerto on the Planets Odyssey.
Would you use the traditional 3-movement and within that a sonata form and a cadenza and all the rest?
Yeah, no cadenzas in that one, but I'm sure the pianist Tammy Miller can attest to the fact that it's hard enough, so it wasn't necessary to show off anymore. I thought, here's a great opportunity to write in some older forms with a new language. And so first movement actually is in double exposition sonata form. The third movement is in a sonata rondo. And the second movement is in its own thing. But I liked those structures. I don't know if there are some audience members who can tell, and a lot of audience members don't, and that's okay. But they're very satisfying, I think, very artistically satisfying forms. And then what I like to do is to change things within those forms. I like to use that narrative as a way to start something and then go off in a sort of unexpected direction.
Talk about the work that you're doing in collaboration with Jeffrey.
The Planets Odyssey. Actually, when I met Jeffrey, he and I had talked about collaborating on something, and he said he had this idea of doing a piano concerto on the planets for many, many years. And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, sure, that sounds great, because guess what? The universe is huge. And there are millions of planets. Okay, so we focus on our same ones, but our same planets have a lot more that could be written about them than just Holst. I had no concerns whatsoever about the fact that Holst already did that, because we can look at them a completely different way. Holst looked at them from the perspective of astrology and mythology, which, works perfectly into what I love. But I thought, well, why don't we look at them from the perspective of what we know from astronomy? What do we know scientifically about them now? I did some research. Now, I certainly, I am not a PhD in astronomy or astrophysics, and this is very much armchair research. So please, colleagues in astronomy, don't, think I am overstepping my bounds here. But I gathered up some interesting facts about what it might be like to visit each planet if you were a space explorer, if you could. The concept of the piece, in part, is Jeffrey was thinking, the pianist is sort of like a space explorer visiting each planet. And so I ran with that. And Mercury, I had the idea of brilliant sunshine against a starry sky, because there's no atmosphere there. So you could see the stars if you could stand there, and while the sun was out. And that stark contrast, along with how hot it is, etc., was the inspiration for that variation. It was the theme in Variations Concerto. And then I'm not going to go through every single one, but the idea was that various, highlight, like Saturn, for example, supposedly might have diamond rain on it. Can you imagine raining diamonds? And now, even though this is supposedly the science we know, as much as we can assume or speculate or whatever, a lot of this starts approaching fantasy, which is what I love about it. It's so, it worked perfectly into everything that I love and found interesting. Some of the natural phenomena are so completely extraordinary. It was perfect for inspiration, and it doesn't really sound very much like the Holst at all. There are a few homages here and there, but it was a wonderful opportunity, and I didn't feel shackled at all by Holst. So,
did you include Pluto? Key question.
Yes,
you did.
So, I did. I had a conductor, Charles Latshaw of the Flagstaff Symphony, who was interested in the piece, and I met him through Jeffrey, and Charles said, well, if we perform it in Flagstaff, Pluto was discovered in Flagstaff. It might be nice if you could include it. And he wasn't forcing me to. I said, well, I should. But the thing was, Pluto has been demoted to a dwarf planet, and I was focusing on all of the the giant planet, I don't know, what do you call them? Non-dwarf planets. And I thought, well, yeah, but if I include Pluto, then I have to include the other dwarf planets too, because why is Pluto so special? Because there's Haumea, Makemake, Eris, there are others, the Kuiper Belt. So I thought, okay, I'll do a whole variation on the Kuiper Belt and the universe beyond. And that'll be a great way to close the whole thing off, because the Kuiper Belt is what Pluto is a part of. It's beyond Neptune. And it can be, a way of thinking beyond and then expanding out. And so that's what I did. And it worked out great for Flagstaff, even though I know Charles would say I didn't require it, and he didn't. But that way I could, when we went to Flagstaff, I could say, hey, it includes Pluto too. So,
did you attempt to include space-time in it at all?
Not
or
conscious.
was that a separate agenda?
Yeah.
Maybe you can do that in your next, the universe version of this.
Yes, the universe.
Yeah, which would be kind of interesting.
I think it would be a fascinating thing to do. I can totally see more universe or more something associated with beyond Earth music in my future. And not actually because I'm a big Star Wars guy or because I loved space in particular. I had a telescope when I was a kid and all that, but that has never been a huge passion of mine. But what I love about it now is being an unexplored frontier. It's a really fertile ground for incredible creativity.
Do you use any like notation software or something that helps you develop the chordal structure and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, mixture. So, of course, I do use Sibelius. That is the notation software that I engrave into. I compose as sort of a mixture. So sometimes I'm sketching at the piano, and sometimes I'm composing directly into the laptop. I do use the playback, but I don't substitute that for real orchestration, because I know darn well you can't rely on the playback for orchestrations. But no, you have to have a concept of how it's going to sound. You can't rely on the playback for it. One of the things I learned very quickly when writing concertos is that even if you're using a piano, God, that orchestra can drown them. So I orchestrate deliberately very lightly with soloists when the soloist is playing. I can compose on airplanes. I can compose in coffee shops. Sometimes I like doing that. It's a different kind of energy. I like people watching. I love like different environments to compose in. And so I'm not someone who has to be just in my studio. In fact, I'm pretty minimalist with that kind of stuff. As long as I have a laptop or manuscript paper, I can just write anywhere. I like having the laptop because, frankly, it speeds up the process. And right now, I'm under some serious deadlines. I have 3 pieces due within the next year for 3 world premieres in 23, 24. And it's like, I've got to write efficiently right now. And it's a great problem to have, but it's I got to focus.
Is your intent to appear at the premieres?
Yes.
Okay.
The live performance is so important for so many reasons. First of all, I love interacting with the audience. I love talking to them. I love talking to them, on stage or pre-concert talk, whatever. But also I love talking with them afterward. I love hearing their reactions. I've been all over the country talking to audiences, and some people have never been to classical music concert before, young people or old people. So it's a great opportunity to talk with them. And I also get to interact with the musicians. I get to interact definitely with the conductor. We get to collaborate in the creative process to whatever extent the conductor allows, because frankly, the conductor is the boss at that point. Yes, I set the music, but I totally respect the conductor as the boss. I don't get in their way. I'm very respectful. Because I know if I want to have a career, I'm not going to make a conductor mad.
Do you ever edit something you've written because of feedback from a conductor?
For sure. Unless I completely and utterly disagree with it. But it's almost always a good thing to do. I am very hard on myself to make sure the score is almost as perfect as absolutely possible before going to a conductor. In fact, though, what I have discovered is sometimes they will suggest a little thing here or there, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's just do that. Then we do it, and then it works fantastically, and it changes for the future. But also from the soloists in the concertos. So when I wrote the viola concerto for Brett Dubner, or certainly the piano concertos for both Tammy Miller and Jeffrey Beagle, they had some ideas. I made changes to enhance the score and make it more playable and create the same effect without making it as difficult.
Well, certainly Brahms looked to Joachim and his violin concerto.
Absolutely. And with strings or with an instrument I am not playing, like I'm writing a cello concerto right now for Mark Koswer. I definitely, or like with the viola concerto, I definitely follow technical advice. I happen to be married to a violinist, so it helps. I can show it to her and say, what do you think? But then beyond that, with another, like a cello or viola, yeah, I will totally defer to them in terms of technique and do what I can just to enhance it. Because yeah, you can't be a world-class expert on every instrument.
What I've read is the most frequent number of performances of most new music is 1. That if you get a piece played more than once, you're actually doing quite well, because there's such a huge number of people composing, and there are only so many symphonies. There's only so many hours that they can program and so on. So there is kind of a limit. So you've done well.
Thank you. The music world could stand to broaden performance opportunities still to more living composers. There is a lot of incredibly well-written, moving, audience-friendly in a way that is accessible to broad audiences. You need to program music, I think, that helps to keep people there overall. But there is so much music out there then that will do that by living composers. I think there's great opportunity, if done well by the people who program, conductors, artistic administrators, or whatever, so that they can bring audience members into the process, so audience members aren't scared or spooked by it. Program it, of course, alongside, you make sure you have your war horses, but retaining respect of the tradition and also bringing people along so that we can expand to be more inclusive.
Do you have contemporaries who you admire? Living composers who really stand out in your mind as really good?
It's a great question. It's hard to say about contemporary. What defines a contemporary?
Well, let's say since 1980.
Okay. Yeah, I have a few. One of the composers whom I love to teach in my classes, for example, is Jennifer Higdon. I think she's brilliant. I think her music is, she's a Pulitzer Prize winner. I genuinely love her music. And I love the colors and the spectacle of it. For someone who's maybe a little closer to my age, Jonathan Leshnoff, he's had music performed, of course, by a lot of big orchestras. It's very impressive music, very soulful music. Jesse Montgomery, extremely colorful, vivid, very well wrought. Chris Theophanidis, very vivid, coloristic composer, writes music, though, that I think audiences can relate to on multiple levels at a premiere without having to study anything. Richard Daniel Poor, I think his music's wonderful too. These are all, I think, fantastic composers.
Since you do these interviews yourself,
yes,
with other musicians, is there something you would want me to ask you that I haven't asked?
Yeah, I think so. One of the questions I frequently ask is, where do you see music going? Sort of concert music, whatever we call this thing, that orchestra music, where do you see that going? I do see there is certainly a strong emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are seeing, of course, that has also been very much a priority of the League of American Orchestras now. And as a part of that movement, I think any efforts that increase the size of the pie, so to speak, for living composers in general, that might come at the expense of some non-living composers, not all the time, but certainly as markets allow. I get it, orchestras have to stay solvent. I get it. That can be done well. And I see I've talked to so many conductors and orchestra administrators who are doing that well, and who are very concerned with relevance and how do they make their music relevant, their programming relevant to their communities, and how do they develop and enhance audiences. So I think as long as that continues to be done on a very broad scale, I think things are going to be healthy. It's really heartening also to see. I see a lot of younger people in audiences. I know it's not everywhere, but I do see a lot of younger people in audiences, and nothing against the older crowd, but we do have to think about who's going to be in the audience in the future too. If that means programming in general is going to be more diverse and more eclectic, I think that's good and healthy for everyone. And I think it's really, really exciting to see, and I hope it continues. And I would add to that, music that is cross-genre and cross style. We've seen some of that, I think, already, but we've had music inspired by folk music. But now we have music inspired by various folk musics or rock and roll or whatever. But it's also concert music played by orchestras. And how wonderful is that? And that's another way to bring audiences along with you if you want to, show them something new too.
Well, we've got 3 minutes and 16 seconds left. So I really do appreciate the opportunity. It's been great discussion. I hope you've enjoyed it. I have.
Yeah, this has been great.
Hey, thanks very much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, you take care now.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
This is Laird again. Thanks for watching this in-depth interview with the dynamic and thoughtful American composer Daniel Perttu. Please show your appreciation for AMC's creator William Ford for another stellar interview. If you would like more information about Daniel, go to www.danielperttu.com or scan here. For Daniel's YouTube channel, go here www.youtube.com/@dnpr29150 or scan here. And please remember to become a patron at patreon.com/AtlantaMusicCritic. You can join for as little or as much as you like, either one time or monthly. It's simple to do, and it will help to ensure that AtlantaMusicCritic.com can continue to provide the best in-depth conversations with creators in the arts. If you have your phone handy, you can simply scan this QR code to become a patron. Remember to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment below. This is Laird signing off and wishing you a happy new year. See you soon.